Welcome to the REDHEADREVEAL Podcast. I am Jenn Pinkerton, your Redhead host, a psychotherapist, high-performance coach, writer, and speaker. As a connection expert, I help people reveal their connectedness within relationships, transforming from the root causes of beliefs and behaviors that hold them back from thriving in life. Let's talk about how you're thriving. All right, today I'm excited to welcome Boo Trundle, who wrote The Daughtership. And for those of you who are not familiar with IFS, internal family systems, this is a lens to look through, to work through a clinical intervention with parts work in therapy. And it's something that I personally love and a lot of therapists love and really kind of stand behind. And I have never read a book with this viewpoint. And when I got my hands on this, I was so excited and knew I had to have Boo on the podcast. So welcome. I'm glad to have you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, so excited. So you're a writer, you're an artist, you're a performer. You've done so many different things. I was really amazed to see all these awesome articles and platforms and publications you're on when I was doing some research. So tell me a little bit about you, everyone who doesn't know of you.
Yeah, it's funny. My digital footprint is big. It's like all over the place. I've got stuff on YouTube. I've got stuff, a blog I used to write. As the years go by, if you keep contributing to the World Wide Web, all of a sudden you have this big record, which is cool. It's like an archive. So that's you don't think about it while you're doing it, but it does go back a ways. So I started after college as a musician, and I made a bunch of records in the 90s. I was part of sort of the Lilith Fair scene, if anybody's old enough to remember that. And I was a songwriter, and it was a big moment at that time for like Jewel. There were a lot of women just kind of breaking out as singers and songwriters, and I eventually kind of veered more into just writing. My songs just got longer and longer, and I realized I probably should be writing fiction, and so I started writing fiction in a serious way a long time ago. And my first book came out last summer, The Daughtership, and that's kind of launched me into doing podcasts and, marketing for the book. And also, as you said, the novel was inspired, informed, and deeply, really forged in the therapy work I was doing at the time, which was internal family systems with, I did that for about 6 or 7 years.
And so it absolutely just kind of spilled over into your writing and into your work.
Always, I think that my
holding it up for anybody on YouTube want to see. Yes.
It looks beautiful. I love my book. So always I would say my inner work and my spiritual path and my interest in psychology, and originally my interest in psychology and philosophy was just for my own survival. And over the years, it's very much intertwined with my artistic practice always. And so I don't think this book would exist without the work I was doing in therapy at the time. I mean, maybe it would exist, but it would be very different. Mm-hmm. And I'm not really doing IFS actively at the moment. I actually took a break from therapy, and I have a new therapist who's Jungian, which is super interesting also. And so you just never know where your path's going to take you. But I do feel like I've been really gratified and excited about the way that the novel has resonated with people who are familiar with the IFS. I recognize it immediately, and they get super excited. So it's cool.
Exactly. So I feel like the whole plot device here was about your inner child work, about what you were doing and addressing your inner child, your parts. I think that from what I read in the book, I don't know, it's a fiction book, but I also don't know how much of this parallel falls over into your own life and what you experienced.
There's a lot of crossover. It's definitely fiction because half the book takes place at the bottom of the ocean in a submarine. In a defunct World War II submarine. So that did not happen to me. But maybe it did symbolically when I was, I thought submarine is a symbol for the subconscious. So if you read it metaphorically, I could almost say that part of the book is truer than other parts of the book. So there is definitely autobiographical bleed through. And as far as the inner child work goes, yeah, that really blew my mind when I first started doing it. But I kind of feel like I was always doing it on some level. I think our inner children and our parts are always at play, whether or not we recognize them or not, obviously. And so it was more about recognizing and naming them and finding a way to communicate with them. But they had always been there, and also, when I was in college, I wrote my first novel, and the very first novel I ever wrote was from like 8 different points of view. I definitely have a sort of very active and very fragmented subjectivity. And so when I write, I'm always coming, and when I live, I'm coming at it from all these little parts, and I just didn't know it. I didn't know how to articulate it in my 20s. And then when I finally discovered it, it just gave a structure to what that's the way I always told stories, but it just gave me a structure for it.
Well, and on that note, I think IFS gives a structure to life, not just, your
Mm-hmm.
storytelling here. You're promoting healing through your storytelling. And I think that also carries over just into life. When you understand IFS, then you have more structure to your own life because you understand everything in your head, all these inner thoughts, all these inner parts, all these
Mm-hmm.
feelings that are so big. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I think we can all be flooded and overwhelmed by that. But when you have some structure to it, you have a better understanding of how to navigate your own life.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes, definitely.
I think that you have so much character development from the IFS. I mean, I have to start off with mentioning Truett and Star and Smushed Bug. So why don't you kind of tell our listeners about those characters?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for your enthusiasm about the book and about the characters. It means a lot to me as a writer. It's just incredibly moving when other people react or respond to. I spent a lot of time writing it, and so I just want to thank you for that. But to talk about the characters, it's funny because I discovered the characters at the same, they are actual parts. They are the actual parts that I was discovering in therapy. So the character Truett is a boy, and I think that's really interesting. Several of my parts are boy parts, and they just always express themselves as boys. And whether I grew up as a girl, identifying as a girl, it didn't matter. They identify as boys, and it was never a question. He just kind of was like, I'm here and I'm a boy. And he is, as far as his age, like I did kind of have to pin the parts down and make them certain ages to make the book work. But, he's just kind of a teenager or preteen. And he's a big bully, so he kind of represents one of my inner critics, to talk, if it's okay to talk technically around IFS terms, but, he is a manager big time and very tough on the other parts. He's the one that gets us up in the morning and, gets our homework done, that kind of part. And so in the book, he is he's the captain of the submarine, obviously, but he's not very good at it, because he needs the other parts, like the book is sort of about how the parts have to interact peacefully or you're not going to get a positive result. And so in the beginning of the book, well, for example, Smushbug, who's the other one you mentioned, she's like an 8-year-old girl. She is in exile, 100% IFS exile, and doesn't really have a voice. I just got like goosebumps talking about her because she's just very innocent, very damaged, very hurt. She carries like all the hurt for the family system. And in the beginning of the book, he, beats the hell out of her and he treats her like shit. Excuse my language. I mean, he just treats her. If you want to edit it, you can.
No, you can,
but he
can
treats
talk
her
however you want to talk on here.
Well, he treats her very badly. And so them coming to some kind of relationship that works is a big part of the plot arc. And then the other part you mentioned, Star, is she is really kind of the carrier of the sexuality of the system. She's 13 going on 30, and she, there is sexual abuse in the book, and she's the one who takes it and she hides it from everybody. And in fact, she doesn't even really have a body. She's kind of a disembodied part. So, I would call her a dissociative process, really. She's very dissociated. And as far as IS language goes, probably a firefighter, because she really takes the main character, Catherine, like out of her body. When Star arrives, it's flirtation, it's intrigue, it's excitement, it's fun, but it's not embodied. And that is, it's a dissociated sense, and it causes a lot of trouble. So yeah, she's a firefighter. So that's just kind of a quick summary. I mean, you have
Yes,
to read the book, obviously, to
for
really
sure.
know what's going on.
And
Yeah.
for our listeners, I think I have part listeners that are so into the realm of therapy and that space that they know IFS and they know what we're talking about. But for some of our listeners who don't, I want to give a tiny bit of a backstory to feel like there's a better understanding.
Okay.
The concept of that these parts do represent parts of ourselves. The firefighters and managers, they are pieces of us. They're the way our brain works. They're the way we think, the way we feel. And so for people that maybe are so new to this today listening, I feel like I need to interject every now and then to make certain that where you're picking up, you understand how that works. But why this is so groundbreaking for me to read is that I just don't feel like there has been a book. And if it's out there, I don't know of it, but a book that really has a beautiful plot and was so engaging, but had this backbone, this basically device in their whole plot that marries and intertwines the way that we think, the way all of our brains actually work. And when you're talking about this exile part, this wounded part, this part that is actually full of trauma for people that understand that word, and how these parts work together, basically like how our own brain, how we all are constantly at battle in different ways, what we're thinking and how we can contradict ourselves and how we can second guess ourselves and how we talk to ourselves. So much of that is wrapped up in IFS. And in the book, you talk about the submarine. So much of this takes place on the submarine. Can you explain just that metaphor a little bit too, about that submarine and what it represents?
Well, the submarine came around very organically in the writing of the book. I grew up in Virginia Beach, and it's a military town. So there were just, fighter jets and you're sitting on the beach and you see these giant aircraft carriers go by, and it just looks so big. You can't imagine that a boat could be that big. So I just grew up, so my inner children are very nautically inclined, and just like everything nautical, like crabs, the ocean, shells. Those are all big metaphors in the novel. And so as I was rewriting the novel, like you said, I mean, a good novel has to have a plot device that works. I mean, you can say all the most interesting things about people that you want, but if there's not some kind of a propulsion or forward momentum going, people are not going to read the book. And unless it's for school, in which case they have to. So yeah, I just needed I found organically over time that the submarine at the beginning of the novel is at the bottom of the ocean and they're running out of air, so it's that kind of clock ticking, are these three quite charming children who you get attached to pretty quickly, are they going to survive? Is the submarine going to be able to rise to the surface, get air, and then get them to shore? And that's the plot device. And then, but all of this is happening inside of Catherine, who is the main character, who's living a more realistic, domestic, suburban. She has a mental health crisis, and she's a mom. And so I think, again, like in terms of plot propulsion, anything that happens to a mom, to me, is even more stressful because it's happening to her children. It's happening to her family. Right. So that is, yeah.
And generational trauma influences so much of these family dynamics and relationships. How much of that did you think about when you were creating these characters, these parts, these pieces?
I feel like the generational trauma thing for me a little bit is I'm kind of like riding a zeitgeist or a wave.
Okay.
It just seems like everybody right now is way more in touch with that. And I've always been really interested in my family's ancestry because I grew up in the South, and there was this Civil War general or, lieutenant general who was sort of the hero in our family growing up. But then when I went to college in the North, I realized there was like a lot of problems with this person in our lineage, and there had been very little questioning of it in where I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So that was like one of my first, sort of when I got out of my original family,
Mhm.
where I was like, oh, wait, like some of the things that I was taught are A, not true, and B, not healthy, and need to be questioned. And so it's always been a very important, um, that particular family relationship and ancestry has always been important to me for how I've asked questions about the past. And so it was just natural for me to bring that into the book. And that is one of, it's not all true. I made up, I had also, because he was like a Civil War general, there's books about him and there's his letters and
Oh,
stuff. So I
really?
could sort of do some research. Yeah, I could do some. Yeah, they have all of his letters to his wife that he wrote during the war. So that's the kind of as a writer, and especially someone who's interested in autobiography, to have that kind of archive, to have that kind of actual is pretty
Yeah.
helpful and
There's so
interesting.
much content to bring into that and adds so much flavor to like the character as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Well, like I said, in terms of the zeitgeist, I think like ancestry.com, and I think family trees, I think people, because of the internet in the last 10 or 20 years, have just gotten everybody's so interested in their own lineage. It's kind of like your dreams, like you think your dreams are fascinating, but you start to talk to someone else and they're kind of like yawning.
Yes.
It's a little bit that like that with the ancestry. Like I might find that my grandmother's life is super interesting, but you may not be as interested. So as a writer, I really had to embellish and make it into fiction and change all the names and all that.
Yeah. And so it seems like you had a delicate little dance between what was true, what you used to influence, and then what you did to make the book, as we do as writers. I'm a writer as well, as we make it more interesting,
Yeah.
as we make it more flavorful,
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
I've always been accused of embellishing, like even in just any story I tell, 5 minutes after it happens, I've added a detail to make it a better story.
Boo, I got to say, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. I feel like I've had to work hard in life to not just be a storyteller, but to also be a truth teller. So that's my own delicate balance.
Well, that is a delicate balance, and I kind of introduced that on the first page of the novel, where there's an argument about what's true, and that's something we were talking about trauma earlier. That's something that I think is an important part of healing. Is at least for me, it's my healing from my childhood experiences. If it's true for me, it's true. And I don't have to force my siblings or my parents to accept it as true. If they disagree, I'm not going to go to the mat on that, because that's not going to help me with my healing. And I learned that a long time ago. Like I had a therapist back in like the 90s that said, let's just assume it's true and we'll heal it. It can't hurt, just assume that what you're saying is true, and we can work on that. And how can it hurt?
It's your lived truth, Boo. I mean, it's the concept of whether people promote something, agree with something, or back something is kind of irrelevant. We have our own lived truth. We know what we felt. We know what we experienced, and we know what we feel, and that is valid. And I don't think it's up for discussion.
Yeah. Well, it can be up for discussion in a family, as I'm sure sure you know.
Sure.
So,
but I'm saying
it's kind of like there's two different ways to approach it. Like
right.
And that's a big thesis in the novel, and it's also about language. I think it's hard. Things that are very difficult to talk about are that's also a big theme in the novel. It's like if you can't articulate it and you don't have the language for it, how it's hard to heal it.
Right.
And that is another place that IFS and inner child work is super helpful. Like I did a lot of one inner child technique is left-handed writing, where I'm left-handed, so for me it's right-handed writing, but you write with your non-dominant hand and you try to talk to your inner child, like with crayons or drawings or whatever, and like playfulness, and it kind of get beyond language, beyond words. And that is something that, I felt like the novel was also trying to do, is just using metaphors and images and returning to them over and over to just kind of push a little bit past true or, trauma, like words that kind of are in some way limiting.
Yeah, agree with that. And I think that one of the core parts of the book that really spoke to me is when it was talking about Catherine's past and how she was basically at the mercy, if, for lack of a better word, with her mother that I guess was hopeless, and this father that was
Mm-hmm.
really scary, and
Mm-hmm.
the seduction aspect of that.
Mm-hmm.
What can you share with me kind of going along with those lines? Because I felt like that was such a big part that made such an impact in the book.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, this topic is hard. There's two reasons why this topic's hard to talk about. Well, there's three actually. The first reason is it's just hard for me to talk about. Like even personally, because I am a sexual abuse survivor, it's hard to talk about without dissociating, which is why I wrote the book, you know? So like the
Yes,
book is like not why I wrote the book, but I think for me at least, one of the powerful things about the book is that it is a safe kind of, it creates its own little sort of safe place where by the time you find out what's going on, you are ready for it. And so it's hard to just jump in on a podcast to talk about it. That's why the book, you know, like it takes like three-quarters way through the book, and the whole universe has been established. And the three kids are in relationship to each other, and Catherine's in relationship with them. And there's like, and they've built the safety, and then you get to it, you know. So that is the first thing. It's just hard to talk about. The second thing is just a taboo in our culture around sexual abuse inside of a family. Like there's a lot of Me Too and openness, like, or attempts at openness around sexual assault and date rape and stuff that used to be kind of unspeakable, but this is still unspeakable. This is still something people have a real hard time accepting that it happens, accepting how often it happens, and allowing victims to have voice. So
I
that's
agree.
the second reason.
And we can leave that with this safe space. I don't want
Yeah.
to put you in a place to not talk
Yeah.
about it, but we can say this. I
Yeah.
love the way you just worded that. Just the
Yeah.
fact that this was such a big thing and that you use the mechanics of this book
Mm-hmm.
to create this environment over time throughout the book where you're what, 3/4 of the way through to then be
Mm-hmm.
able to really land that there for the reader. That in itself
Mm-hmm.
to me is really important because that promotes, I think, what I would want everybody to even think about is that it is so important for us to have a safe space. It is so important for us to feel as though we have gotten to a place in knowing ourselves and processing our feelings that we're actually ready to feel to heal. And you've
Right.
done that in your book in that way. And we can leave that right there because that message alone to me is very powerful too.
Well, thank you. Well, I mean, we can leave it there, but then the third thing I was gonna say, which is too late anyway, is that, you know, it's a little bit of a reveal, you know, like a spoiler.
Yeah.
Like, so, but we already spoiled it, so sorry. But yeah, I should have started with that. But yeah, the third reason it's hard to talk about is that it is something that kind of comes out in the writing, in the reading. But that's okay. I don't really think it's a spoiler. But anyway, if it is, I apologize. And then the other thing, you know.
I don't think any spoiler is going to keep anybody from reading this after today. And I've been talking about it nonstop. So I think,
Oh, thank you so much.
you know, I
Thank
think that
you.
my listeners do really look forward to knowing kind of what I'm going to pick and choose to talk about because I try
Yeah.
to pick books that I think really make an impact if I am interviewing writers. We have all kinds of thought leaders on this podcast, but writers are certainly
Right.
one of the genres of type of people that I like to speak with.
Yeah.
Shane,
Well, I wanted to say one other thing real quick, if that's okay, which is that
yes.
since we're talking, like I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm not supposed to look at my Amazon reviews, but I do. And someone wrote, you know, somebody was super triggered by the book, and she was like a therapist too. And I mean, according to the Amazon review, and she said something like, this book is so triggering. I would never recommend it to anyone. And she said, I threw it away when I finished because I wouldn't want anyone to come across it, you know, really triggered. And I thought about that a lot. I was like, wow, she actually, like, it's almost like she said she burned the book. You know, she was like, after I finished it, I didn't want to leave it. I didn't want to give it to a yard sale. I just wanted to get rid of it. And so in a weird way, I feel inspired by that. You know, I feel that she must have had a very powerful response, and and that probably it's going to cause or probably going to ignite healing on some level, even though it was triggering for her. And I also feel like, you know, the easiest thing to do is to put a book down. So, you know, at any point in that book, she could have been like, this is not for me, you know, but instead she read it to the end.
There's an important part with that you're talking about, in that it's no different than whether we're looking at a piece of art, we're reading a book, we're listening to music. There's going to be certain things that speak to us as an individual that we're curious about and we like, I am not into jazz music. That doesn't work for me. But you give me some alternatives, some EDM, and I'm right there. It's my taste, and somebody else is going to have their taste. Just like I think some people love true crime and want to get into very gritty, gory details in true crime, but other people are very turned off by true crime. And that doesn't mean true crime is wrong. It just means it takes a certain person that's their interest. And so for me, this book aligns with my interests. And I think a lot of people that I know, and certainly that follow me and listen to me, that will align with their interest. But some people it won't, and that's okay. We're not put on this earth to please everybody. That's not what we're here for. We're here to be bold and bright and big.
Yeah, I've never been good. I've never been very good at that anyway. So, but I just thought it was interesting because she was a therapist, and of course I am. Like, I don't want to trigger anybody, but then again, sometimes triggers can, be a resource. So
it's true. That's true. But I'm glad you said that. I think that's very interesting. I wouldn't say that I think reading reviews is very helpful either, honestly, because you put out something, it's done, it's there, that's what it is.
No, I know. It's hard to resist.
And buy it or they're not. But I bought it and I'm happy to have it. So I'm going to show it again.
I'm really glad. Yeah.
This is the beautiful cover. This is the book. I want to ask a question too about, these signs or little hints when somebody has experienced a lot of trauma. And I saw those kind of sprinkled throughout the beginning of the book. You would have these little moments where it'd be like, oh, wait a minute, there's something more there. Wait, why are they doing that? Why do they feel that way? And I wondered if you thought about that in that way when you were writing, if it was these little tidbits, little morsels that you were sharing and spreading as to this big buildup.
I think, yes, the way that I organized the book, I like to say that it's not a linear story. It's a vertical story in the sense that I do kind of put something out there, and maybe because I'm writing from different parts. And so the different sections in the book are written from the point of view of the different parts. And so one of them might introduce something in one way, and then the other part might come back and say, yeah, that is not how it happened. And that's not what I'm talking about. And so it gave me an opportunity to revisit, things that happened to Catherine as a child. And I think that is, like you said, hopefully to me, it simulates or sort of recreates the way that our brains actually work, where we have a memory that we keep returning to, and we may feel differently about it as time goes on. And also we're almost, at least for me with my childhood trauma, when I first started trying to heal, I was almost like I was a private investigator investigating my own story. And I would have to put pieces together and be like, well, that, at the time, I thought that was normal. And that's still happening. Like, just happened last weekend. Like, my boyfriend mentioned a movie, and I remembered seeing that movie in the theater. And then I realized, then I looked at when the movie came out. It was like, I was like 7 years old. That was not a movie I should have been going to at a theater. So, there's still things that you get little pieces of evidence, like, okay, somebody wasn't looking after me, like somebody took me to an R-rated movie, and it's like not the end of the world, but these things build up. And yeah, in that way, the book is kind of a true crime, in some ways. There are little clues, but that's how it is when you go back and try to clean up your the parts of you that are not only damaged but destructive. That's the main point of the book, is that Catherine is in a self-destructive spiral. And it's her damaged parts that are doing the destruction, and she has to address them to stop the destruction. And that's the plot. Like, will she get there in time?
And that's so much of a plot that
she doesn't want to.
would resonate with a lot of people, people that suffer from unhealed trauma, unresolved emotional wounds, if you want to refer to it as that. But it's going to hold us back, and especially shows up relationally. It shows up in our romantic partnerships the most of anything, because it's the most much of a resemblance to that and that dependency and that consistency or lack thereof. And I think that so many people have that work to do, but don't even recognize that it's something they need to do. And I saw the word shame kept up with me so much when I was reading this about Catherine, the shame that she had in her life. And I think that shame is so pervasive, and it's I feel like it's something that so many people accept. They just accept that they have that. They accept that's the way it is. And they don't think that there's any way to abolish that. They don't think that there's a path in which to do that. And I think this book illustrates that path in that way. And for people who maybe are a little uncomfortable with therapy, or really uncomfortable with thinking, I don't really want to revisit these things that were painful to me. I've learned how to shove them down. I've learned how to use that as a maladaptive, basically, coping skill, and I'm not going to touch it. But when you read a book that not only is it touched, it's touched in this way where she's actually going through it, and you see how her brain is working, you see how these feelings are coming up. I think that that is very inspiring to people who might have not wanted to go there. I think the opposite of maybe what that other reader and reviewer had said. I look at it as it's kind of inspiring that if Catherine can do that and that's her experience, then maybe we can look at our own selves as well.
Yeah, I've got like tears in my eyes listening to you because that's it. Like that is my wish. I don't know that while I was writing it, that was my goal, but after I finished it. It didn't have to be my goal because it's my lived experience. And everything you were just saying, like, I just want to I'm glad you're recording it. I will go back and listen to this myself because it's just really wonderful to hear you because you really got it. You're putting it in a really great, in your own language. It's really great to hear you kind of mirror back to me what I've been thinking about. And I had it was like a huge moment in my life. I'm getting like emotional about it, but when I heard the phrase shame reduction, I didn't know it was possible. And exactly what you're saying, it's just like I had just accepted it. And like the metaphor that I sometimes used at the time was like I kind of felt like with my shame, like I would move it from one, like I would like imagine like there's like a wine glass and then like a big jug bottle and then like a bowl, and I would just move it from one vessel to another and kind of move it around. Yeah, just like pouring it, but not ever to get it out, just to like move it around. And the thought that you could actually get rid of it, it never occurred to me. I mean, and that is such a weird thing that it just like that's a weird thing about shame. And and shame is like one of those things too that's very hard to talk about because nobody wants to talk about that. Like as soon as you say the word shame, people feel a little bit of it. And it's my new book that I'm working on came out of this exact topic, which is like nobody wants to talk about shame because they start to feel it when they talk about it. But in order to reduce it or maybe like abolish it, what a beautiful concept. It needs to be brought out and looked at, but it doesn't want to be brought out. And so it's just a real bind.
I use this analogy often with my own clients and then people I talk to about shame and trauma together because they're married in that way. It's a sponge, sponges absorb everything. They take it all in. They can hold it. It gets fuller and fuller and fuller. And it's doing its job. But at some point, it overwhelms and exceeds the ability to absorb. And so now it's just running. You're squeezing it and there's just water's running. It's running down all over you. And I feel like that is an analogy that a lot of people can grasp. And that is what shame does. That is what unhealed trauma does. It will 100% spill over into your life in a very negative and painful way if you don't learn how to feel to heal. And that is the only path. The only path is to feel those feelings that we've repressed. And it doesn't mean we need to go back and relive trauma, but it means we have to address the feelings that we have surrounding that and look at our parts surrounding that. And I think that's a misnomer where people think I can't go there. It's too painful. But I don't believe that effective informed trauma work means diving into all the pain. It means let's just dive into the feelings that are around that experience and let's work through those narratives and concepts and feelings. And I just love the way you did that in this book. And I fell in love with Truett and Star and Smushbug so much. And I wanted to continue to hear and see where their paths were. And I loved how much they contradicted each other because my own parts contradict the hell out of each other. I mean, I feel like sometimes I've got a full on World War III going on in my head. So I love that. And I think it's amazing. So it's a great book. And I want everybody today to please read it. For people that
buy it,
follow you, I think on Instagram and TikTok, you are Boo Trundle, and then Facebook, also the same, Twitter, Liz Trundle. I guess everybody can get your book on Amazon. We'll have everything in our show notes. But I want to mention to you the question we have. So we always have a prior guest that leaves a question for my current one. And then I'm going to ask you to do the same. And we sort of just carry on interesting thought concepts as the concepts and the topics of our podcast change over time. It's interesting to kind of weave them together. So a prior guest left this question for you, and it was, what does survival mean to you?
Well, I love that question. It's a huge preoccupation of mine, mostly because I'm just gonna be totally honest, like I've had a hard time, like wanting to stay here on this planet. And that's just something I've struggled with since I was like 19 years old. And so for me, survival is just staying here, like just staying here, see what's going to happen next, like I just hang around and see what's going to happen next. You never know. So I've had to do about a million different things to convince myself to stay here. And now I have children. That was a big win because, as soon as I had kids and I was like, well, I now have a contract that I will stay here and like see what happens to them. But that doesn't mean I don't have my dark days. So, and I think especially right now, like people struggle, with this sort of finding purpose and, just wanting to get up every morning and do it again. So life is an adventure, but I kind of need to convince myself of that sometimes. And so that's to me that's what survival means to me. It's like do whatever you have to do, but just stay here.
I love that vulnerability. And you're so vulnerable today with us, sharing so much. And for me to see you're getting emotional about it too, just lets me know that we're such on this wavelength today. And I just love it. What guest question can you leave for somebody else that might move them in a similar way?
Well, the question that came to me right away, and I don't know if this is a good question, is do you believe in an afterlife? And if you do believe in an afterlife, what does it look like? And how does it affect your life now? Your present.
It's a great question. There's no boundaries around these questions. I like a free flowing stream of consciousness and conversation. So I appreciate that. And we will post that to our next guest.
Well, that's what came into my mind. That is what came into my mind. So
this has been an amazing conversation. And I loved having you on here today, Boo. And when you get that next book coming out, we got to have you back on for sure. I can't wait to read that one too.
Well, no, I know I think we're going to have a lot more to talk about. And that's why, everybody has to buy this book. So my publisher will publish my next book so that we can get back on this here and have another conversation. Okay. Let's keep it going.
The Daughtership by Boo Trundle. You can get it on Amazon and at bookstores near you, and really appreciate you coming on today, Boo.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you.